You're listening to That's
That's
High
high praise.
Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I am your co-host VH Zest.
And I'm your co-host, Captain Nostalgia. Happy Halloween!
That's right. Today, recording day is Thursday, the 12th of October. So tomorrow's kind of a rare treat, Friday the 13th in October. So that's pretty cool. And as such, to keep it seasonally appropriate, we're gonna do one of the very few Nicolas Cage horror movies.
Yeah, I feel like by this time in in the podcast, we've done all of the good ones though.
No,
Uh,
we haven't done all the good ones.
Aside from a few that like we haven't done, this is 2015's Pay the Ghost. This is a direct-to-video film. And
Direct to DVD film. Yeah.
yeah, I have I have thoughts about this movie.
Same. That's where I'm gonna get into it. Yeah. So, Josh, initial thoughts.
This movie is before we jump into thoughts, do you want to give like a brief synopsis about what this
Yeah,
movie's
let's do
about?
that. Okay. So basically, Pay the Ghost. Nicolas Cage plays a man whose name I forget. Um,
His name is Mike.
his name is Mike. That's right. He plays a guy named Mike. He is a college like teacher. I assume he's a professor of literature. And so anyway, he's intermittently throughout the movie you see glimpses of that. But this movie is basically about him and his wife. And early on in the movie, they have this son, and he's very excited about Halloween. It's actually set. This movie is actually set in late October. Um, and his son's very excited about Halloween. And he's very just like close with his dad. He wants to make sure he carves his pumpkin with his dad, things like that. Anyway, his dad's home late from work, doesn't get to carve the pumpkin or go trick or treating. But to make it up to his son, he takes him to a local carnival. This is in New York. Buys him ice cream, walks around, he has like a video camera, and they're like recording things, and he's holding his son's hand, and then his son disappears. So that's kind of then the rest of the movie is them trying to figure out what happened and getting back their son.
Yeah, and just to kind of like this movie takes place late October. There's a
Yep.
year jump, and then it comes back to late October.
Yep.
Um, yeah, this movie is okay.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like what I'm finding about myself as a film viewer here recently is that I'm finding that there's a third like reaction that I watch when I watch a movie. You know, it's no longer I really love this movie, I really loathe this movie, or now it's like I feel neutral on this movie. Didn't love it,
Yeah.
didn't hate it, and that's
I
how I
could
feel
take or
about
leave
this
it.
one.
Yeah, I think I don't think all movies have this problem that kind of all horror movies in October, the setting of October, have this problem. But I think this movie has the problem of like not distinguishing the difference between a horror movie and a Halloween movie. Because although there's some crossover between those two genres, they're not the same. Hubie's Halloween is not a horror movie, you know, just to use a recent example. Halloween is definitely both. But then there's plenty, I would say the majority of horror movies have nothing to do with Halloween. And this movie, throughout the first and maybe even into the second act, they try to get you with jump scares and things like that. There's really, there's creepy things that do happen. But by the third act, it's very much like they mentioned the like Festival of Samhain, and things like that. And it's very much like, okay, this is kind of taking a turn at where it's now like a Halloween movie. It has a little bit, it actually becomes oddly like more innocent as it goes along, which I feel like Halloween movies are kind of that way. They're not necessarily kids movies, but they're more apt to be family movies, things like that.
They have that lighthearted feel to it. Like
Yeah.
I'm glad that you like bring up because like I think for me like the subject of like Halloween movies are like Hocus Pocus is a great example,
Yeah.
like
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Goosebumps,
Yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas. There's a bunch of Disney Channel original movies like, Twitches and
Under
Halloween
Wraps.
Town, Under
Yeah.
Wraps, Don't Look Under the Bed. Like there are Little Monsters, like there are a bunch of these movies that like have just approached the subject of like horror through the lens of a child, and it has like a
Sure.
really innocent, very like a great. I think QB Halloween's a great example. Is like
Yeah.
it captures just that spirit of like innocence that just happens to have like scary themed things that
Yeah.
happen within it. And this
Yeah. The
movie is. Go ahead.
I was gonna say like the word spooky is literally perfect because it's not scary, it's not overly foreboding or anything like that, but it's spooky in the way that like it's creepy but attractive, you know? It kind of has that feel.
Yeah, in this movie, like I never kind of thought about it in that way, kind of looking at it through the lens of it like being a Halloween movie, but it perfectly is because it's a movie that doesn't quite feel like it feels too innocent to call itself a horror movie.
Right.
And I think a large portion of that is because every time that it's essentially a ghost story, uh, that kind of blends into fantasy, but when you have the two elements blend together, it kind of comes off more childish than it does anything else,
Right.
especially with the climax of this movie.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that the majority of this movie is like, you know, parents facing their worst nightmare of losing their children and
Yeah.
kind of the impact that that has on a marriage.
Right. And I think you're right. Yeah, because you know, in the second half or toward the beginning of the first act, like you see that like they're not divorced, but like the parents just had a hard time, so they're not they're
Separated.
separated basically. But yeah, I think like you make a really good point of like this movie kind of like it has some childish sort of aspects to it, especially you know as it goes along toward the end. Um, you know, and I personally I think that could have really been to the movie's credit had they leaned into it and committed to this being a Halloween movie. But they really tried to make it, you know, scary in the first and even into the second act. And they just don't balance it well at all by the end.
I'm also curious too, like, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Jake, and we got talking about the book Pet Cemetery.
Sure.
And Pet Cemetery is St Stephen King,
Hmm.
and I I really like it. It's not my favorite Stephen King book, but it's a solid read nonetheless.
Sure.
But he said something that like struck me, and he's like, it hits differently when you're a parent, the story that it goes into. And I'm almost curious if like because neither one of us are parents, like if this story like actually hits in the horror. Because
Yeah.
I could definitely see it through the lens of someone like this, like my mom and I got separated when I was like little at like Walmart. And like that fear from like a child angle is like absolutely crippling.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's the same way for like a parent as well. And I don't know. I think maybe it didn't for me, I think those elements of that psychological stuff feels very niche for one, unrelatable for me, but also at the same time it felt like every time that they tried to like actually commit to the horror in this one, it didn't stick because they were like, "Up, we gotta stay innocent. We gotta stay sweet, you know?"
Yeah. Yeah. I think this movie, and I hear you. I think that like that's a very valid point that like neither of us are parents. So this movie loses some of the fearful element that it could have. And when it comes to being an effective horror movie, I think that it could have been cool, and they would have probably had to lean into the more spooky kind of Halloween aspects to do this. But I think that like had we have gotten if even one scene or part from the kid's perspective while after he was missing, that could have actually really solidified, had they done it right, maybe even solidified it as like a scary thing because everyone has been a child, you know. So it would have made that relatable from the perspective of pretty much anybody who would watch it. Um, yeah, but the boy literally just disappears, and that's pretty much it. There's like there's investigation, there's this big file, you see there's this detective that's working on the case and stuff like that. And like the dad, Mike, Nicolas Cage's character, he has the Charlie Day whiteboard thing going on. And at one point, and like it's all there, but it's a little hard to take seriously because the boy is just there and he's not. And all you have to rely on is like this dad's reaction to really like impact you and to leave you with that sense of loss. And it's fine. Nicolas Cage is good at emotional reactions. Um, but it wasn't I don't know. It was okay. It was fine. It just didn't it lacked something that really made you feel, the impact of the situation.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that
Mhm.
it would have been different, the emotions or, kind of because you do like it's it feels like he exists, like the son, Charlie exists in the first act way too long. Like it seems like that like whole like he was there then he wasn't like you don't let the audience get attached to him. So I think
Yeah,
that like having it be like a 2 to 3 minute like cold open where like we don't know anything about like Nicolas Cage, we don't know anything about his wife, we don't know anything about, their marriage or this or that. Like it's literally like just Cage, opening up and maybe we fast forward a year and he's like in bed and he's like maybe an alcoholic,
dreaming. Yeah, yeah,
because like
yeah,
yeah, like he's like living with the regret. Like I think that you could have landed that emotion side so much deeper. And I think that's also kind of the problem that I have with this movie is that it doesn't seem like it's unsure of its like genre and its place
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
go ahead.
I hear you. I think that like, you get a little bit in like one scene of the mom being like, "How could you do this? How could you lose our son?" And then like they're separated and that's it. It's
So
not like or like I think of like Hereditary, and the
Mhm.
like just like the emotionally charged, just heart-wrenching scenes in that movie between family members, and like it really carries that movie emotionally, even in a way that is non-fearful. And this movie needed that and had very little of it substantially.
Yeah, like it's weird. Like their dynamic is really weird in this movie because they almost kind of feel estranged when they actually are together.
Yeah,
And then he like basically is like he's like, I got this theory. He might have been taken by a ghost. And she's just like on board for it, like immediately.
yeah,
And I was like, this is such like a weird like juxtaposition because
yeah,
like I feel like if this had any grounding in reality with that supernatural twist, like you would have her Kristen would have been out of the picture, like period.
sure.
Like this would have
So
been a solo Mike adventure.
yeah, I mean, I don't think it was immediately because I remember like she doesn't take him seriously. She's like, she freaks out on him or whatever. And then she goes home and she's like woken up in the middle of the night and she's like, looking around her house and seeing shadows. And then she sees a like Razor scooter ride itself
Hmm.
and like fall over. And so at that point, she like goes to Mike's work and she's like, I think you're right. And to your credit, is very rushed, but she does have that experience. And they both have experiences they admit to each other of like, I keep seeing our son, but when I go to try to like get to him, he's not there, and that kind of thing. And you could chalk that up to loss and grief and just the effects of that. Or you could be like, oh, well, that's like, it's a horror movie, so like there's a supernatural element, and they never address it at all. It's just there.
I feel like also as like the host of Bisgazing, the horror podcast here at Victims and Villains, like I want to talk about how this movie uses horror because that Razor Scooters sequence is like a great example where they try to do these like really cheap parlor tricks to kind of get this like jump scare out of you.
Yeah,
And then like it seems like it just kind of gets like milder and milder and milder, as you said, like as the film progresses
yeah,
to where like we're ultimately left into this like the ending of this movie like still puzzles me. I've seen this movie twice now, and the scene where like he's like rescuing Charlie back from like like the Vale area. I don't know what you want to call it.
I don't know either. Yeah,
Was kind of I mean, I guess like we were building to this the entire time, but like this movie should have just been like fantasy, like not a
yeah,
horror.
yeah. And so like there's one point just to kind of connect some dots here. So like Charlie, right before he disappears, I should say, he says, "Dad, we have to pay the ghost." And that's all he said. He'd been seeing these CGI vultures around. And
Also,
go ahead.
I just want to know, like, because traditionally in horror movies, when people are like seeing the other realm kids, like, there's usually some sort of like Ouija board or like witchcraft, and that just seems like a very like minuscule detail that they were just kind of like, we're just gonna, we're just gonna go over this. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt that way, but that's just kind of how I felt.
Um, I don't know. I felt like they got to things very late in the movie as far as explanations go, but um, I don't know. I didn't feel that it was wholly dissatisfying. It did connect the cold open of the movie with the actual plot. Because the cold open is takes place in like the 1600s. Um, but anyway, like the kid says, like, Dad, we have to pay the ghost. And then like so Mike's character goes on this journey of like trying to find out about kids who were taken on Halloween specifically, and he figures out that like kids who are abducted any other day of the year, the majority of them are found. Um, on Halloween, half or fewer of them are found. Um, and uh, and so that he kind of goes in this thing, and he like tracks down like a couple of the parents of the kids who were like taken on the same day that Charlie was, and both the parents mention that the kids say something about a phantom or a specter or a ghost, and then he sees like he just arbitrarily walking down the road sees a vulture, and then he sees like graffiti that says "Pay the ghost." And then he walks toward this graffiti, and there's like a staircase down into some like abandoned warehouse hold thing, and there's a well-adept blind man and some homeless people, and like then he hears this wailing in the rafters, and like the guy takes him to a wall that just says "Pay the ghost" all over it, and then it turns the camera around and you see like a spooky face like over his shoulder for like 1 second, and they don't even address it, and it doesn't look very good. um yeah, and it just it's weird, and it's ineffective in the sense that like it's a clue, I guess. That's the one thing I kind of liked about this movie is it has that sort of mystery aspect that some horror movies don't, but some horror movies do, and I really appreciate that when a horror movie has kind of a mystery element. But it just feels kind of ham-fisted. He happens to see this thing that says "Pay the ghost."
That's kind of what I was talking about, is that this feeling like unsure of it. So,
Yeah,
fun fact for you about that blind guy.
yeah.
He is played by Stephen McHattie, who is the original Night Owl from the 2009 Watchmen movie.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Small
That's
World.
probably the coolest thing about this film.
Would you like some more trivia?
Yeah, definitely.
So this movie was first announced in 2010. I don't now when it was announced, I don't know if this film was headed for a theatrical release or if it was going to be bigger than this direct to video release that we got. So, when this movie was announced originally in 2010, it was directed by Dennis uh, Iliadis. Probably mispronounced that name, but he is most famously known for directing um the rape revenge remake of The Last House on the Left, and I'm almost curious if there is a darker version of this movie because most of his films are like on the darker, riskier side
Hmm.
of film storytelling, and I'm almost kind of curious if like we would have gotten a like grittier kind of darker in tone
Yeah.
kind of film.
Yeah. Yeah. That could have been interesting. Honestly, like I keep saying, like a commitment in one of the directions that this movie tries to go in would have benefited this movie greatly. Had it been like a mystery, cool. Had it been a Halloween movie, like it ends up being toward the end because he literally has to go into like save some kids from a ghost. And there's like spooky specters and like the first decent CGI you see in all the movie. Actually, it's probably just makeup, but um, and yeah, like, or had they committed to like it being horror, and I don't know how they would have done that exactly, but either way, like, yeah, the movie just doesn't really commit, and but a darker tone could have been really, really good, and just keeping the story, what it is.
Yeah, I think it needed to commit one way or the other because like it gets progressively weaker in any direction you spin it as the film progresses.
Mm, yeah, I mean, so I think you're right. I would say mostly that it just progressively changes because it starts and it's evident that like you're watching a horror movie. And then in like the second act, it basically becomes a mystery movie, and they find out about this symbol, and they research this symbol, and they find that it's this, Celtic like witchcraft symbol, and they find these people who still celebrate like Samhain, on the 31st of October and all that stuff. And then by the third act, it's like, you know, child's dad has to go rescue child from 400-year-old ghost curse, you know so yeah, I don't know if I wholeheartedly agree that it just gets worse, but it definitely commits less and less. I honestly like the third act, but I like it kind of in retrospect. Like I liked it in the sense that I wished the first and second parts of the movie had been that way.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, I really feel like tonally, I really wish this movie would have done anything. So I
Yeah,
have three more facts for you. You
let's
want all
go.
of them?
Yeah,
All right. So let me just start out by saying God bless the internet and people that have the time on their hands that I do not have. Quote, if Annie, who was um the witch from the beginning of the movie that kidnaps the children,
yep.
kidnapped three children per year from Halloween 1680, the first year after she and her children were slain in 1679, to 2015. She would have been 335 years old, or this tradition would have happened for 339 years, but she would have captured a grand total of 1,005 children.
That's pretty cool. And honestly, so they show you like when you get into like her, I don't know. It's basically like they try to picture it as like old New
Oh,
York. He goes into this
yeah.
warehouse and like crosses this bridge thing. It's like kind of supernatural, kind of like they try to make it gently historical. Um, and like you see this old house, which is where this witch and her like children lived, and he sees this expanse of kids, and it's pretty big. So I mean, 1,000, that makes sense.
Right. Um, so when Mike is hanging the missing child posters, you can clearly see another poster partially hidden that shows only the word wit. Clearly a hint to the antagonist in this movie, which I really want. Like, witchcraft movies are like really entertaining if they're done right, and I
Hmm.
really wish that this movie would have leaned a little bit more into that, or at least been like Suspiria and kind of like thrown us for like a loop.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, for sure. Yeah. Leaning in any direction more heavily than it did would have been good.
That just
Truly.
seems to be the theme of
It is.
this
It is.
episode.
The movie is not like, again, this movie is not good. It's not altogether bad. It just kind of refuses to commit to anything that it's trying to be.
Yeah. So my last fact that I have for you, not counting all of Annie's previous victims, the body count is five. Annie, the three children, the psychic medium, and Hannah. That is six. This is what I get for reading the word from IMDb. So,
What are you
uh,
gonna do? We need some sort of trivia. I'm
yeah,
actually on the wiki right now trying to find some sort of trivia, and there's not really anything that's like
yeah. I said this before we started recording, but that's kind of the low key issue when you have
apparently
these
there's a
movies.
mid credits scene.
I've seen this movie twice and didn't even know that existed.
I didn't either.
Do you know what the
In a scene mid credits, three black vultures appear surrounding Hannah's corpse and she awakens possessed.
they're like, we got to set this up for a sequel. Nicolas Cage will be back. He will return. Um, yeah, that's wild to me.
Big rip.
Um, yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to this movie. This movie's pretty straightforward. It's kind of an okay movie, but I think it oh, let me throw this out there before I forget.
Yeah.
This movie stars I'm probably gonna butcher his name, but Lyric, I'm just gonna say Lyric Bent, who most famous from the Saw movies. Great actor. He does a great job in this movie. Plays the detective.
I was gonna say the
Also
detective. Yeah.
also played the detective in the Saw movies, so full circle. Uh
Yeah. I will say like the acting in this movie is fine.
yeah, it's not bad.
It's really not bad. And like we've watched a lot of Nicolas Cage movies and he definitely has some not very good ones for sure. And it's what a lot of people seem to know him for some reason. It's like those in Con Air. Um, and I don't know what it is, but it's like those in Con Air, I swear. Maybe Face Off. Um, but like a lot of his movies really struggle in the acting department. It's like he's doing a good job or he's doing an okay job with what he's given, and then everybody else is like, mm. But this movie's honestly, the acting is totally fine. Like I have really no complaints. It could be better, but it's not bad by any means.
Yeah, I feel like the when I end up tuning out to a movie, it's for bad acting, but also like during the emotional scenes, like I'm like, all right, I need to feel some connection. I feel like the emotions of this movie are really well done.
Hmm.
Like the scene where like Mike goes back and he has to like tell Kristen that he lost their son, and
Yeah,
she like kind of freaks out. Like that is like really well done.
yeah,
There's a couple other scenes where like that type of like emotion hits really well, but
yeah.
I think it
It's not Mandy, but it like
yeah.
it's good and it makes sense.
I think it begs the question, is Pay the Ghost worthy of high praise?
No, it's not worthy of low praise, but it's not worthy of high praise.
I'm gonna say it's not. I'm just gonna say it's not worthy of. I think it's it's not even. It's really complicated my feelings with this movie because it's. I think I've hated it more as we've sat around talking about it. Ironically, I think for me, it's not worthy of high praise for sure. I wouldn't even say it's worthy of like mid praise, but maybe just above high praise or low praise, like somewhere in that gray
How
area
about we
down
give it
there.
a star? You want to give it? You want to give it? You want to do that?
We can do that. What would
Yeah,
you give us?
I'd probably give it 1.5.
1.5?
Yeah, I liked the third act well enough. I wish the rest of the movie had been the same tone. I think the acting is fine. I think you're right. A lot of the emotional delivery makes sense. Maybe not the writing of like the emotional experience, but the delivery of the actors and actresses makes sense. I think the story is fine. I like the how they brought in like Samhain, which is like one of the very first origins of what, Halloween is and became, but it's not a good movie. Those are literally all the good things I could say about it right there. That's it.
1.5 sounds fair.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, we really didn't like talk about it. Like, how do you feel about like Nicolas Cage in this movie
Yeah, we always
as a
we
Cage
always
podcast?
this is a Nicolas Cage podcast, Josh, and Nicolas Cage in this movie um is fine. He's adequate. Um he's adequate. I don't think that like there are some movies that we've seen that it's been like this movie is bad except Nicolas Cage. And I like, you know, I don't feel that way about this movie. I don't feel that like any part of this movie is really its saving grace. And that includes him. I think he does an adequate job with what he's given. That's fine.
It's like he doesn't stand out from the other performances in this movie. This definitely isn't like if I'm gonna show someone like a Nicolas Cage movie, it's definitely not gonna be this one. This one's not even on my radar. But he just kind of like levels and blends in for this movie. I think he just kind of does what the movie needs it to be. Like I think adequate is a perfect word for it.
Yeah, it's adequate.
Fine. So all right. I think it's gonna do it for us on this episode. But the good news is on our next episode, we're finally gonna be talking about Butcher's Crossing.
That's right.
That's a
That's right.
thing.
Finally, it's been technically out for like a year, but
Yeah.
it's been out here for a year internationally. It's finally getting a domestic release. So
I I think actually the next two episodes we're probably gonna end up doing are both brand new releases because that
yeah,
comes out of the 20th and then he has Dream Sequence out like 2 weeks later.
yeah. There's Dream
Or
Sequence,
Dream
um,
Scenario, sorry.
Dream Scenario. Yeah. Uh, Pay the Go, not Pay the Ghost. This is what we're doing. Um, Sympathy for the Devil is out on Blu-ray
Mm.
and DVD. So if we can get a copy of that, we can do that. We're probably gonna have to wait on Retirement Plan. Um, but that's okay.
I've got so much to say about that movie.
What?
So I've got so much to say about that movie.
Me too. Yeah.
Uh, I really
Yeah.
wished you still lived in town so we could watch that together.
Same. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's gonna be a good rest of the year. But where can people find you online, sir?
Yeah, you can find me at Letterboxd, at VHZest, which is what I'm currently going to give Pay the Ghost a 1.5. Um, you can find me on YouTube at VHZest. You can find me um on I guess I think yeah, I do have TikTok. I barely use it. I was using it consistently. Um VHZest 2. Apparently just VHS was taken on TikTok. Yeah, so that's where you can find me.
You guys can find me also on Letterboxd. I'm at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can check out my other podcast, Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast, wherever you guys get your podcast from, as well as That's High Praise. And you guys can check out our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Patreon, and wherever you guys get your podcast from. So until the butchers come across and keep on a caging.